How many of you understand yourselves to be the offspring of the African continent? Let me see some hands that might understand things that way. Oh, okay, all right. Oh, okay, some yes, some no. Okay, well, I was an anthropology major. I don't know about you, what you learned, but how many of you think that the idea of races is an accurate descriptor of what the human family has? You think there's real differentiation? No, so that's an artificial premise, right? Something constructed by a particular segment of the world's power, let's say elites that wanted to, let's say, slice and dice up the planet, create a hierarchy of people, and then pillage that which they didn't have for themselves, right? Yeah, I mean, there's some shady business that took place on this planet over the last 500 years. And really, that's about all it is, because before Vasco da Gama or before that one called Columbus, which I have issues with, and somebody talked to me after service, before some of these folks dared to venture around the Cape of Good Hope or across to Turtle Island, Europeans were largely in Europe. Africans were largely in Africa, Asians were largely in Asia, and the aboriginal peoples of these two turtle islands, North and South, were here, right? And then our pilgrim forebearers land on Plymouth Rock, and nothing has been the same ever since. You see, have any of you been to Boston and done the Freedom Walk? Did you ever do that Freedom Walk? Well, the first person spot that you're going to see is the one earmarked for Crispus Attucks. You remember him? Crispus Attucks. It's a wonderful thing to go back in history and read the description by the British officer that writes up what took place that day. Yeah, a bunch of rowdy colonists throwing snowballs and then rocks and bottles at the British military that's there doing their job, just following the orders, right, of their military higher-ups. And there, in this, call it a wayside tavern, Crispus Attucks and a few of those colonists venture out into the street, and they join the children and others pelting the British military. Oh, heck, we were all part of Britain, or Great Britain, right? We were colonists. And those military men, like they do in Palestine or Israel or anywhere in the world now, when somebody throws things that hurt at you, they ended up shooting. And the first one that dies is Crispus Attucks, right? But when he writes about Crispus Attucks, he gives a narrative that few white Americans, I think about. And it's something that came to mind while I was sitting here. Crispus Attucks is a man of color, but the British officer writes he's neither black nor white nor Native American. For those were the three types of people around Massachusetts Bay Colony. Neither black, like an African, sub-Saharan African, I'm imagining. Not like Muammar Gaddafi. He looks like a Latino to most people, right, who don't know, right? But it didn't look like Muammar Gaddafi. He's not a sub-Saharan dark-skinned man. He's not a white man, clearly, but maybe he has some white-like features. And he's not a Native American physically. Crispus Attucks is a combination of those three peoples. Even his name Attucks belongs to the indigenous people of Massachusetts Bay Colony. He was black and white and Native American. First one to fall. Now, I've got this dual narrative in my mind. What if black folks and white folks had never come to America and we had just stayed in our own little corners of the earth? What would the world be like today? Well, that one doesn't work out so well for me because I couldn't exist. I'm black and white, Native American and Asian, and 2% Jewish. As if being Jewish can be ascribed to one particular ethno-cultural group, because there are Jews on every continent, right? And some people even say Native Americans are some of the lost tribes of Israel. That's somebody's story. All right. Yes. All right. So black and you. How does this thing possibly happen when given the particularities, the cultural norms, and the discrimination that happens in the United States? How could you end up black and you or Latina and you or, you know, how does anybody who's not essentially a WASP, and I don't mean that in the worst sense of the word, you know, how do you get into this Unitarian Universalism? Well, for me, it's a family history, because if you read this book, Mark Morrison Reed goes into pretty heavy-duty historical research about two black ministers, two of the early black ministers. Egbert Ethelred Brown, a son of Jamaica, and I'm a Jamaican, my mother's family, and Egbert Ethelred Brown is my relative, born in Ocho Rios and died in America, right? He's the second black Unitarian minister. And Louis McGee, who is the first black minister settled in a white congregation as the senior minister. The year I was born, 1961. Now imagine that a denomination, two denominations who were some of the largest abolitionists, some of the biggest fighters for freedom, that it took until 1961 here in California, in Chico, California, for a black minister to get the church. And it took a white minister resigning his pulpit and encouraging his congregation to give this black man, who had been a minister for some 40 years and had served down here in Los Angeles at First Church as their associate and had been in Chicago serving, some 40 years of pastorate, took a congregation in Chico, California, and in particular a white minister, to think so well of this man that he resigned his position. Some of you folks are really good. I mean that. You know, if that's you, you should feel good. But this story isn't a pleasant one, my friends. You see, despite the best of intentions, Unitarian Universalism has had a very difficult time both bringing people of color, and in this case, in Black History Month, I'm going to go black on you, bringing Negroes, African Americans, black folks, or colored folks of the African diaspora into your congregations, our congregations. It has not been easy. Now, in some places, it's understandable why it doesn't happen. You know, how many black folks are out in these far-flung places? I know I'm not going to Boise, Idaho. I don't know. There's some places Gordon doesn't go. See, homie don't play that. Miami to New York, San Francisco to LA. Some of them parts, no. You couldn't pay me. But the reality is, there are congregations in inner cities. And I served one of them in New York at All Souls. Some of you remember Forest Church. Forest Church, I was his intern minister. And in that lovely, very wealthy community, there were a few colored folks. Not many. Not many. There's good reasons why. The ladies' auxiliary said to me one day, "Why, Gordon, come join us for our luncheon." And we had little watercress sandwiches and all. Now, I'm a brother from Harlem. I wanted some fried chicken or some potatoes. Look, watercress sandwiches and tea. Okay. So then they said, Gordon, at the next ladies' auxiliary, why don't you bring some of that good Negro food down to us? Well, the good thing about it was I actually was a vegetarian at that point. And I said, I couldn't possibly do that, ladies, but I will bring you something like, some jerk tofu from the Jamaican spot. Oh, no. See, there's good reasons why, where we have an opportunity to have a mixed congregation, we don't. And it's because of some of the ways we do things. Despite the fact that we have the principles and purposes which give us, I think, the bedrock for the very best thing within organized religion, it's harder to live out those values than you might imagine. You know, like Christians or Jews or Muslims who don't actually live out their values all the way. It's nice to give lip service to the inherent worth and dignity of everyone because that feels good to say. But when the inherent worth and dignity of everyone means that I've got to change things that I do, or I have to take some money out of my pockets and share it with some other community, oh, baby, that's a whole lot harder to do. You see, being a Unitarian Universalist requires something of us that most of us idealize, but will find very difficult to live out. I remember being in seminary and having a discussion about this very notion of inherent worth and dignity. And someone brought up, well, that means Hitler has to be held in some way that we don't want to hold Hitler. That means that Idi Amin, Baby Doc Duvalier, Pol Pot, it means monsters of this world must be held in some respectful way that the average Unitarian Universalist probably would rather not. You see, inherent worth and dignity is not something we're all good at. It sounds good, but when it comes to the rubber meeting the road, it's much harder. Now let me share a little bit about Egbert, my relative, who was born in Jamaica and learned of Unitarianism from his Methodist or Anglican church setting. Somehow he learned of this idea of the oneness of the divine, the oneness of God, and the heresy that the Christian church had created by the development of the Trinity, right? Because those Jews who were followers of Jesus, they didn't know anything about a Trinity. Certainly, the Nazarene, known as Jesus, didn't speak of a Father, Son, Holy Ghost. That wasn't part of a Jewish mindset. And he was intrigued. He was intrigued enough to write a letter to the American Unitarian Association in Boston and saying, here I am, a Jamaican. I've got my basic understandings and some letters behind my name. I'm interested in becoming a minister with you all. And they write him back and say, well, there are no black congregations. And in fact, we don't think that Negroes are intellectually gifted enough to understand Unitarianism. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a bad story. Read the book. I've seen the documents. They're at Meadville, Lombard, all the letters. Everything is there. He happens to be my relative. My father and mother know the story oh too well. Nevertheless, Egbert's a real go-get-em kind of guy. And so he says, I'm going to press on. I want to do this. Won't you give me access to your seminary at Meadville, Pennsylvania? And they say, well, if you can manage to get here, you can attend. And he comes. And just a side note, Jamaicans are the largest group of black immigrants in the United States that didn't come during the cross-Atlantic slave period. So I'm a Jamaican, and I'm happy there's over 2 million legal Jamaicans here, and I don't know how many more are in the Bronx or Miami or Brooklyn. I can't speak to that. But Jamaican Americans have made significant contributions here. Colin Powell, Jamaican American. Kamala Harris, our senator, Jamaican American. So understand We came here to get something, not to play games. More importantly, Egbert Ethelred Brown came to Meadville Seminary, studied, passed all his courses, got ordained, the second black man in the history of Unitarianism to be ordained. And he ventures back to Jamaica because he wants to bring this religion that's expansive and freeing, non-dogmatic, liberal. I want to push us towards progressive, but liberal. And he builds a congregation in Ocho Rios. Anybody ever gone to Jamaica? Please go. Go back to Jamaica. What's old is what's new. They want you to join them. They need the money from you. So please go to my isle that I love. He builds a congregation and it doesn't succeed. There's something called prejudice in Jamaica. And prejudice resides within all peoples of this world's hearts in one way, shape, or form. Could be your eye color, could be your hair texture, could be how thin or full your lips are. Egbert Ethelred Brown was espousing a religion that largely is the domain of the intellectually gifted and the upper classes. It's true here in the United States, even more so in Jamaica, which at that time was still a colony of England, and England and all its colonies are very class-conscious societies. He packs up his bag. He didn't go to Beverly Hills like the Beverly Hillbillies, but he finds his way to Harlem. Harlem is the mecca of black life in 1920 or so. And he finds his way to Harlem. The Harlem Renaissance is alive in Langston Hughes and County Cullen and you name it, who's who of that black vanguard, that Negro elite were residing in Harlem during those days. And Brown builds a congregation at the Harlem YWCA using their chapel. You know, he had no money to rent a church or anything, but the chapel at the Y is pretty cheap. You know, $3 or $5 a service, and they let you use their space. So it was in those days. When my father goes into that congregation, because it was a whole lot easier for him to walk to a congregation in Harlem than to get on the train and go down to Community Church, which is really one of the first integrated congregations in this country, certainly within the city of New York. Minister Brown and that Harlem elite functioned for about 20 years, maybe 30 years. He never grows large. In fact, to be Unitarian in a world of Christian ministers is to be held at arm's distance. Black clergy to this day, when I tell them I'm Unitarian, they like, brother, what are you thinking? I say, that's what I'm doing. I'm thinking, obviously you're not. The reality is that I understand the normative cultural values which would hold a black person within the Christian world, in particular within a Baptist frame of reference. Dr. King's Baptist, one of the great Baptist preachers just died that walked with Dr. King, Wyatt T. Walker. See, 80-some% of black folks in America that are still churched, because that number's slipping, just like all church participation is slipping. But 80-some% of churchgoers that are black are going into a Baptist church. Well, the Baptist church in the United States was one of the only places where black people could be educated. See, they have congregational polity too. They vote on things. They teach their members. It was one of the only places a black person could speak freely without the white society, which was either Jim Crow or forget Jim Crow, just downright racist and hateful, could be. There's a reason black clergy, black undertakers become the first middle class of black America. It's one of the only spaces white folks would leave black folks alone. So Egbert Ethelred Brown had minimal success, but he planted something within the hearts and minds of the Harlem community that still lives to this day. And for the 10 years I was the director of pastoral care at Harlem Hospital Center, I gave a Unitarian Universalist service in the chapel 5 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. And I had more people in that hospital chapel than I have in my congregation in Verdugo Hills. And it was diverse, just like the hospital staff, black, white, Latino, Asian, everybody, coming to hear a service that was open to the world's philosophies. And because it was a hospital setting, trying to edify, strengthen, uplift those who are dealing with difficult situations. Now, I told you about a second minister. Or if I didn't, I'm going to tell you now. I'm getting long in the tooth and forgetful. Louis McGee, the one that got the church in 1961 in Chico, California. One of 4 black ministers ever served this region of Southern California. 3 of them, Louis McGee, Chester McCall, Monica Cummings, all at First Church, L.A., the Commie Church, right? That was their nickname, the Communist Church. L.A.'s communist community gathered at First Church. That's no sin. I'm still a card-carrying member of the American Socialist Party. I got no shame about it. And nothing in Marx's writings are all that bad. Totalitarian states in China or Russia are not what Karl Marx wrote up. So don't confuse what America tells you with the realities.
Amen.
Thank you. Louis McGee, some 40 years in ministry, gets that church up in Chico, California. But Louis McGee was one of those brave souls, one of the first black clergy who left his Christian grounding and roots and stepped into humanism, stepped into a totally different way of understanding things. Not looking for pie in the sky like Reverend Ike used to say. He was looking for humans to be the authors and creators of a new day. Humans having the power to transform this world, dismantle racism, sexism, homophobia. I don't know if he was that liberal, but I'm going to give it to the brother. Louis McGee is someone that I wish more Unitarian and Universalists would know about. Again, I'm going to commend this text to you. It should be on every UU's reading list. Louis McGee created something in Chicago that's still going, the Free Religious Fellowship. It's one of the few black UU entities that exist. All these years since 1948, still operating in the Hyde Park area somewhere in Chicago. So why haven't we as Unitarian Universalists succeeded at being more integrated? Well, that's relatively easy. Given that so many of our congregations are in suburbia and whites took flight from inner cities after World War II, it's easy to understand why, as most of our congregations are in white patches, that they aren't filled with people of color as well. It's also easy to understand philosophically, theologically, and culturally why not that many black folks, and I'm focusing on black folks, but we could extend this to Latin people, Asian people, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans. But this is Black History Month, and I'm primarily a black man, although I lost my color trying to fit in with you all. If you Google me, you'll see a picture of a nice-looking young black man who's getting ordained. And 23 years later, I'm a pink man. The truth is hard. It's really very hard on a brother. I got to watch myself when I walk the streets of Harlem or Long Beach. But there are reasons. And if we're going to change our denomination and truly become the place where East meets West, North meets South, Black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander, GLBTQI, I don't know what letters coming next. If we're truly ever going to enter into that space where all people are not only welcome and told that we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of everyone, but that we actually make space for different cultures. I just got into a debate at Verdugo Hills because they said, well, Gordon, you racialize everything. And I said, I picked up this book. I said, isn't this book 95 or 98% white? Isn't that racializing everything? In order to bring the other in, and not just bring them in so they're an object, but they're actually welcome, you have to share the space. And it's not having a black or a pink minister come in once a year and say something to you, but it's making a cultural calendar of Latino, Pacific Islander, Korean, Jamaican, Irish, Welsh, Norwegian. It's about embracing the totality of the human family, but we only want to do things through the prism of our WASP understanding, our New England roots. And despite the fact that in the West, you've been able to break the shackles of many things from back east, I'm here to tell you the West is more segregated than it is back east. I grew up in Manhattan. I had black, white, Asian, everybody on my block. All the schools I went to always had everybody. And every place I go here in the West, more or less, is very homogeneous. This is the most segregated space I've ever resided in. This is troubling to me. If Unitarian Universalism can ever live into its dream, into that great potential which I think it has as the greatest thing in organized religion, if we're ever to not be deferring the dream but living the dream, we'll change the way we do things. We'll play music genres, and I love your music. We'll have films that we show. My film group at Verdugo wants to show Emperor Jones, and I want him to show Get Out. You understand? You understand me? Emperor Jones is 100 years old, and nobody under 50 is even going to understand it. Do you know Emperor Jones? Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson is the star of it. I mean, it's something from a historical place and time that's important for cinematography or the history, but it's not relevant the way Get Out is. And if you haven't seen Get Out, please do. We have to evolve into a new space, a new creation, a new people that no longer are black or white or Latino or Asian, but just human. And just human in all our best qualities. We have to be able to serve some gumbo, because I'm half from Louisiana, half from Jamaica, and some curry sometimes, huh? We have to be able to have more than rock soup and bagels. And listen, the food's got to get better at Unitarian Universalist congregations. We need some more flavor. The music's got to be more like yours. You've got good music, but I've been to 100 UU places where the music was like death. It wasn't just a dirge, it needed to be buried. Can't sing and play things off tempo, man, just bad. So, Black in UU, it's my 23-year odyssey in a white denomination, trying to compel, coerce, beg, borrow, and steal all I can to get you, my beloved, to find a way to fully integrate your space, whether it's through the personage of people of color or it's through a letting go of whatever stops us from just being a human family and fixing the wrongs that continue to plague us on this earth. I can't do it alone. White America must join me in this. White UUs have access to white Americans that I don't. White folks go, oh, here he comes again. Because I'm an agitator, constantly agitating, pushing the envelope. I have to. I'm the son of 2 black lawyers. I know my rights. I did a year of law school. I'm somebody that won't be stopped nor held back from pushing the most fundamental thing that is for us as Unitarian Universalists. The coming together of different minds, bodies, and spirits. I pray that this congregation, when you have an opportunity to bring in more folks, you figure out how to get them in here. I pray that this congregation and all our congregations don't beat yourselves up over a lack of diversity, but implement a changing of the mind so that whenever you encounter a Latino, a black person, a trans Asian person, you don't see them as that, as an object, but see their humanity. I pray that our association, which has been on the cutting edge of leadership in this nation, Bill Sinkford, the first black to head a major white denomination, Peter Morales, the first Latino to head a major white denomination, although Peter Morales is a white Latino. Don't get that fuzzy. He isn't a Puerto Rican with negrito roots. He's a blanquito, or whatever you would call a white Hispanic. But still, Peter Morales. And now we got a woman, Susan, right? President Susan. So we are on the cutting edge of what this nation should be, but you got to work on those other folks who are still backwards. Some of them who are in your families. I know I've got some backward folks in my family. All of us do. We've got to change them. So I pray that it will be done in our lifetimes. Amen.